Hello and welcome to episode 13 of Market Values, the Transfermarkt podcast that spends each week looking through the biggest stories in football and tries to line them up with the market values of the biggest stars around the world. As always, I'm joined by Manu Vett, my co-host. Manu, how are you today?
Yeah, good. Excited for today's episode.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a huge amount to discuss. We tend to try and globetrot as much on this show as we can. Unfortunately, not so much the case on this week's show. Some scheduling conflicts got in the way and stopped us from kind of doing a bit more of a kind of pan-continental express in terms of the European market value updates. And we're still going to the Netherlands, don't worry. I speak to our colleague Kevin to discuss all the biggest updates in the Eredivisie, including two players in particular who are almost certainly leaving the Dutch top flight. But we also speak to our colleague Ben Littlemore on two occasions. One, to do with English Championship, which is the sixth most valuable league in the world. It's worth bearing in mind, even though it is the second division in England. And some really exciting players there who are making waves. And of course, the Premier League market value update, Manu, which, you know, we have to talk about. It's the biggest, it's the most valuable league in the world. And some big movers for sure in that top flight, weren't there?
Yeah, so much money. So absolutely, it's a topic that we cannot ignore and we won't ignore. And it's always a topic of a lot of discussion among the users as well, right? Debating the market values. I don't want to be in Ben's shoes having to do that league.
It's a lot of pressure, but he handles it very, very well. And yeah, you're absolutely right. There's constant interest and discussion. And as always, if you want to discuss the market values, and there have been a lot of changes to player market values up and down the sport, as we are in the middle of the market value season, here at Transfermarkt, you can head over to the forum, which you can get to from the homepage, and then go to market value discussion, and you can filter through your favourite leagues, favourite players, favourite clubs, all of the above, and fill your day with some very interesting and educated discussion. But for now, Manu, before we get into the meat and bones of this episode, we wanted to bring up an interesting talking point. We like to use this intro as an opportunity to either discuss discussions in the forums on the website or some data that our data team have pulled up. And our colleague Ewan Robertson actually pulled up some really interesting data for an article this week on the single biggest market value rises for any player in the history of Transfermarkt. And we'll throw it up on the screen now for people who are watching this, for people who are listening to it at home. I'll quickly run through the top 10, Manu, and then we can maybe cherry pick our favourite ones. So there's 4 or 5 players joint on top 10 with a €40 million upgrade, but I'll go through a few of them. You've got Mohamed Salah at Liverpool in 2018. You've got Cole Palmer at Chelsea in 2024. Harry Kane at Tottenham 2018. Lautaro Martinez in 2019. And you've got Ousmane Dembele at Barcelona in 2019 as well. Then in 9th place, we have Ousmane Dembele again in 2017, who saw a €47 million upgrade in the market value in December 2017. Then above him in 6th place is Neymar when he moved to PSG in, what's that, August, I think, of October of 2017, who saw a €50 million upgrade. This month, we have Kvara Kvaratskhelia, who moves into 5th place on the list with a €50 million upgrade, following, obviously a fantastic season. And for anyone who hasn't listened, a few episodes back, we spoke to Stefan on our French team about everything to do with the Georgian winger. So if you're wondering why we're not discussing him today, it's because we did talk about him recently on the show. Just above him is Vinicius Jr, who also saw a €50 million upgrade in 2021 at Real Madrid. Just above both of them in 3rd place is Kylian Mbappé, who saw his market value increase by €55 million in 2017. Lionel Messi saw his on the same year increase by €60 million, but put him in 2nd place. But in 1st place, Manu, in 2018 is Mohamed Salah, who saw his market value increase from €80 million to €150 million, which saw it obviously increase by €70 million. Now, we've got a list of like 50 players on this list, so we obviously can't discuss all of them, but it really is a who's who, Manu, of the most impressive world-class players of the last 10, 15 years, isn't it?
It really is. And I mean, we can explain all of these updates because, of the things that happened on the field or the things that happened in regards of transfers, right? So, I mean, I looked at this list right away and I thought, wow, there's a lot of guys here from PSG. And in two cases, it's quite straightforward why the jump is so high. The Kylian Mbappé transfer at the time from Monaco to PSG for an enormous amount of money, right? That was a loan with an obligation to buy the following season, and it was in the 100 million plus range. So obviously that drove up Mbappe's market value. Not to say that he didn't deserve the upgrade based on his performances at the time. He was the most significant talent to emerge that year. That Monaco team that he was on went very deep in the Champions League. They reached the final, if I remember correctly, or the semi-final. That was obviously a really big factor. And then, of course, the same with Neymar. His 222 million euro transfer remains the biggest transfer in football history. And so, of course, we had to adjust. We don't always agree with the transfer fees paid, like only because a transfer fee was paid. We don't say like, well, that's his market value. We maintained at the time that PSG probably overpaid for Neymar. And PSG, they triggered a clause that Barcelona thought wasn't never going to be triggered by anyone, right? The fee was so high that they thought they were safe. PSG went and did it anyways. And, so that's the jumps in market value right there. And then you have Kvara, who is also a PSG, but his transfer fee was not that high, right? This is a new era at PSG, and under Luis Enrique, their transfer business has been very different. They no longer pay huge fees for single star players. Kvara was sort of on the leftover bin at Napoli when they signed him, right? And then emerged as the superstar player. So in his case, I would say it's pretty much almost performance-based.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just want to also raise some interesting players from the past, which I think might be a kind of welcome trip down memory lane for some people, because I've just gone, like I said, we've got a list of the top 200, I think I've got in front of me. And you can really go back. For example, Eden Hazard in 2018 got a 25 million euro upgrade when he was at Chelsea, which is the 122nd largest single upgrade. In 2004, Antonio Cassano at AS Roma. So his market value increased by 25 million euros, put him 117th. In 2004, equally 2004, the exact same update as Cassano, Rio Ferdinand joined with Cassano for 25 million euro upgrade. So he's sitting at 115th. You scroll up the list and we get to Chelsea. Two players in 2004 saw their market values increase by 30 million euros, and that was Ricardo Carvalho and Didier Drogba. Blast from the past for some Chelsea fans who are probably harkening back to better days, perhaps, at Stamford Bridge. And then we get into the top 20. Francesco Totti in 2004, so his market value increased by 35 million euros, which put him 18th. Wayne Rooney, market value increased by 37 million euros, so his market value, increased by 37 million euros in 2004. He's 17th. And then just above him, with a market value increase of 38 million euros, is Ronaldinho, who saw his market value increase by 38 million euros in 2000.
Can I just add a little note on there, though? Those might be first market values.
Yeah, I think they are, yeah. Because obviously many of them are like their first market value. So that was, I think, when our Transfermarkt started doing market values, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, they would have already been in the Bundesliga, but 2004 is, I think, when they went international.
Yeah.
And some of these guys got their first ever market value. But still,
so a bit of a kind of, technicality, but it goes to show perhaps how much things have changed over the years and how quickly market value can improve these days, and there's certainly some interesting ones there. There's maybe some concerning ones, or maybe ones that maybe hung over players a little bit. I'm looking at Antony in 13th place, whose market value increased by 40 million euros when he moved to Manchester United. Nick Voltemata in 21st, who saw his market value increase by 35 million euros when he moved to Newcastle for a large fee. And Hal Felix in 2019, sitting 22nd on the list, when his market value increased by 35 million euros when he was on the cusp of really kind of breaking into Spanish football before leaving Benfica, if I'm not mistaken. So a lot of players there who maybe didn't live up to the hype. Not as many, I'd say, as you would think. A lot of players certainly deserve the hype that they got there, Manu. But it's a very interesting list, I think, as you said, of either showing where the big standout transfer fees came from in football history, but also perhaps where key players really kind of stepped up and became world-class players as well, I think. Because even in that top 10, as you mentioned, Kvaratskhelia, a perfect example of a player who's earned that market value increase because of his performances. Vinicius Jr. equally so. Mohamed Salah there too. Leonard Carl, who's 14th on the list for what he's done at Bayern Munich this year. Kevin De Bruyne as well in 2018. So a real kind of interesting mix of players who have either earned it through performances or I guess technically also indirectly earned it through transfer fees, which obviously, as we know, are a direct correlation to, the value that clubs put on those players based on how they've done on the pitch.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Or at least it should be. Maybe the exceptions that I named with Neymar. But the one that really stood out to me looking at it right away was Mohamed Salah, that 2017-18 season. So that update was in May. And Liverpool, they didn't win the title that year, right? They finished 4th. But I think that was the first full year under Klopp with his squad, right? Because he comes in mid-season the year prior, if I remember correctly. And so he started really building the momentum towards what ended up being a title win for Liverpool 2 years after. But his increase from 70 million euros, and I mean, what a purchase he was. They bought him for very little from Roma. And now he's, playing the final. Well, he's seeing out the final weeks of his contract. Expires, of course, on July 1st, and is headed to the World Cup. So, yeah. But the rise there is just enormous. 70 million euros is a significant increase in market value.
Yeah, I think in many ways you could say that was maybe the pinnacle of Salah's career, because not just in terms of market value, but also in terms of what he achieved. That was his first year winning top goal scorer in the Premier League. First year winning Player of the Season at Transfermarkt, which is the all-important one, of course. He won the Premier League Player of the Season and then African Player of the Season as well. But as you said, went on to then win the Champions League with Liverpool the following year. And when, I think, basically right after the season where everyone's like, oh my God, this guy is a world-class player. How did Chelsea ever let him leave to go to Roma? And and as a result, his market value just absolutely skyrocketed, and I think understandably so. And he certainly lived up to the hype.
Yeah, he did. I mean, I was lucky enough to see him one more time live, not this season, the season before. And I think, that first year under Arne Slot, where they won the title as well, he was incredible too. But yeah, obviously about 8 years ago, he was at the pinnacle of his career. Yeah, what a player.
Yeah, well, talking about players who, were on the verge of greatness, we now have to start our breakdowns and discussions about the market value updates. And we're going to kick things off with a trip to the English Championship, where Ben will discuss with us some of the most intriguing and promising players in English football and why they're most likely not going to be staying in the second division next season. On this podcast, we try to focus on as many leagues as possible, and that usually means we have to focus on the top tiers in European football, the biggest leagues. We obviously do our best to cover some of the smaller leagues around Europe, but we very rarely venture down to the second tier of competition in most countries. This week, we have to make an exception because we had the English Championship market value update. And for anyone wondering why we have to make an exception, it's worth bearing in mind that the English Championship is actually the 6th most viable league in the world. It recently overtook Liga Portugal, and it's right just behind Liga. And there's a fair gap, admittedly, between the Championship and top 5 leagues, but it is undoubtedly a league we have to talk about. It's got some exciting players. It's got some big teams there, of course, and more increasingly players who obviously go on to make their name in the Premier League. And as such, we got Ben back on the show to discuss all things to do with the Championship. Ben, good to have you back on the show. And it's been a really fascinating season in the Championship this year, hasn't it?
Yeah, it pretty much always is, to be honest. I think it's one of the best leagues in world football. It's so unpredictable. It's so hard to call at the start of the year who's going to go up. I mean, I don't think anybody at the start of the year would have called Coventry winning the league so comfortably and Leicester getting relegated. You just never know what to expect with it. I mean, Hull City on XG would have been relegated from the league. They're now in the Premier League. So, it's a league where anything can happen. And I think, like you say, with the money there in terms of being the 6th most valuable league now, you're seeing that money filter down from the Premier League. Over the last decade, we've seen the Premier League outspend all of Europe, and that's obviously trickling down now to the Championship. Obviously, you have the parachute payments that come for the relegated teams as well, which sees even more money ploughed into the league. But it's been another fascinating season. And in this latest update, some big changes.
Yeah, absolutely. In many ways, it's probably one of the toughest leagues in Europe, just in terms of the kind of sheer grit and attrition that it takes on teams and players and coaches, for sure. We want to focus primarily on one player in particular who was the star of your market value update text, and that's, of course, Hayden Hackney, the Middlesbrough defence midfielder, deep line playmaker, holding midfielder, whatever you want to call him. He saw his market value increase to €32 million. Ben, he's broken quite a lot of records and stats here. He's the most valuable player in the Championship, but he's also now the most valuable player to ever play in the English Championship. A lot of people listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube or Spotify probably don't pay a lot of attention to the Championship. Can't remember the last time they watched Middlesbrough in the Premier League. But in England, this guy's certainly making waves, isn't he? So why don't you maybe explain to people why his market value's got up to €32 million, why he's now the most valuable player ever in the Championship, and why people should be keeping an eye on him this summer?
Yeah, Hayden Hackney's a future star. He'll be a Premier League midfielder. I mean, unless serious injuries happen or anything like that, he's going to have a very good Premier League career. Interestingly, since the last update in March, Hackney actually hasn't played a lot of football. He played about 4 or 5 games, then got injured. But what has happened in that time frame is, 1, he's won the Championship Player of the Season. 2, Middlesbrough have completely fallen apart without him. I mean, we've spoken in the past about, it's come up, players sometimes become more valuable when they're not playing, and this has certainly been a case of that, because you've seen when Hackney's come out of that team, Middlesbrough have fallen apart. They were, at one point, probably just before he got injured, they looked to shoe in for automatic promotion, really. They completely fell off. They ended up finishing in the playoffs, which they obviously lost the semi-final and the final in quite remarkably after Southampton Spygate. But Hackney, unfortunately, he could only play a small role on the off the bench in the final because of the injury. But even when he came on, you could tell instantly he's levels apart. And he will move on this summer. If Middlesbrough's gone up and got promoted, they might have been able to hold on to him, but he's definitely going to be Premier League bound, and there is numerous clubs interested. At the moment, Man United are really in it as well, with Michael Carrick, who managed him at Middlesbrough, a big admirer. Everton, Tottenham have also been heavily linked. He was actually really close to going to Ipswich last summer, and the deal fell through, and that was going to be for around 25 million euros, but that price would have gone up now, and I would be surprised if he goes for less than 32 million euros, to be honest, this summer, which is also one of the key reasons why he has gone up even further. But yeah, I have no doubt that Hayden Hackney will play for a Premier League club next season, and he's been fantastic in the Championship this term. He's also been a regular for a lot of the England youth groups at last summer's Euros for the, I think it was under 21s. He was a key player and a starter. And we've known for a while it's going to be a matter of time until he does go to the Premier League. And yeah, I'd imagine this summer now he will make that move, because there's no way Barrow will be able to hold on to him now without getting promoted.
Yeah, heartbreakingly, he's opted to play for England instead of Scotland, despite playing a few games at youth level for Scotland. We could have certainly used him. He could have actually probably been called up to the Scotland squad for the World Cup, considering Darren Fletcher's son's already been sped run to that first team under Steve Clarke. But back to the Championship and back to Hackney. I'm just looking at a list of the most viable transfers of players who've left the Championship or left Championship clubs to move to, well, almost certainly all Premier League clubs. Now, it's a wee bit convoluted because a lot of these clubs got promoted and then players moved, or clubs that got relegated and then moved. But, you know, some household names there for Premier League fans. Romeo Lavia, €62 million. Georgino Rutter, €47 million. James Maddison, €46 million. Nathan Ake, Mateus Fernandes, Harvey Barnes, Archie Gray, Tyler Diblin, guys like that. And like I said, a lot of those players maybe technically still Premier League, getting relegated or about to get promoted. What kind of fee do you think we're talking about this summer for Hackney? Because you mentioned the clubs that have been linked to him. You know, there are your Brightons and your Nottingham Forest who certainly know how to throw money around. But as you mentioned, there's even bigger clubs like Manchester United involved there, aren't there?
Yeah, and for the actual list of the most valuable players in the Championship that he tops, we have excluded those players that got relegated. For example, Romeo Lavia didn't play in the league, he got relegated with Southampton, and then he moved on when we technically had him in that. But yeah, I think well, obviously our aim at Transfermarkt is to get it close to what the fee is going to be in the summer, because we're trying to react to the market. But of course, also teams will overpay and underpay for players. So we have to get what we think their value is on a fair market. And I would imagine that it would be around 32 million euros. I guess a slight concern for clubs might be that injury he's had, but it's the only really serious injury he's had in his career so far. So I wouldn't have thought that would have put teams off too much. We've spoken a lot about the English tax in the the past as well. So I think he fits into that category. Yeah, I would imagine it would be around 32 million, maybe slightly north of that, depending on how good Middlesbrough are at negotiating. Obviously, having not been promoted, they do lose a little bit of their negotiating power because Hackney is going to probably force a move if he's not allowed to. But I'm sure Middlesbrough fully expect him to move on this summer. And yeah, I would imagine it would be somewhere in the early 30 million euro marks.
Yeah, very, very interesting player to keep an eye on. And I've got no doubt that we'll hear all about him this summer in the summer transfer window. But let's quickly move on to one other player we want to touch on, who in many ways kind of stole the show in this Market Value update, Ben, and that's, of course, Femi Azeez, the Millwall right midfielder. His market value increased by 10 million euros to 15 million euros. Biggest increase in market value in the update, if I'm not mistaken. Talk to me about Azeez and what has impressed you so much about him, and what made him, I guess, the star of this market value update in terms of the biggest gains.
Yeah, top player. And he's probably one where we got a little bit caught out in the last update. Probably should have been a little bit higher before. It was one of those where he just really exploded just after we'd sort of finalised the last values. So he did look way too low at 5 million euros for what he was doing. He was absolutely key in pushing Millwall into the playoffs and actually getting them quite close to automatic promotion. Scored a lot of big goals in big moments. He's capable of the spectacular as well. Scored some great long-range strikes. And there's a lot of Premier League clubs that are already being linked this summer as well. I would imagine top championship clubs or sort of lower down Premier League clubs will definitely be looking at Femi Azeez this summer. And as I say, it's one that we definitely had a little bit too low, probably at 5 million. So we felt we needed to be aggressive with that push, taking into account the market this summer for wingers and what we've seen other players of similar profiles go for in the past. So yeah, he was a big beneficiary of Millwall's sort of charge, which unfortunately for them ended up in losing the semi-finals to Hull. But him and Tristan Kramer as well, a defender who went up by 7 million, were big winners from the update. And Femi Azeez, don't be surprised to see some Premier League clubs looking at him this summer as well.
Yeah, and I was just looking there. They signed him from Reading for just 1.15 million euros. You'd imagine if he does go for even his market value or something above that, Ben, we're talking about huge profits for Millwall if they can't keep a hold of him this summer.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. It's been some good recruitment there, for sure.
Okay, well, let's finish up on a sadder note. It can't all be good news, obviously, and that, of course, is Leicester City. Obviously, back-to-back relegations, one of the kind of most horrible stories in English football this season. Now, we can't really get into it all on this show. We'd probably need a whole podcast to kind of discuss the kind of rise and dramatic fall of Leicester City in English football. Obviously, once upon a time, Premier League champions, but we're talking about a club here who saw one of the biggest downgrades in market value across the entire squad. They lost 25 million euros across the squad and now have a squad of 120 million euros. But they go down then with sort of sizable size in terms of the market value of that squad. So maybe just kind of discuss and debate the kind of, not debate, sorry, but highlight to people who maybe not been keeping up with Leicester City what the current state of, not the club itself, but maybe that squad is as things stand.
Yeah, it's been such. Leicester players have probably been the hardest thing from this update to assess because it's truly remarkable that with the parachute payments they've got relegated, and with the squad they've got relegated. I know they had a small points deduction for financial laws, but even after that hit, and it sort of put them into the mix for relegation, having been previously mid-table after a really disappointing start, nobody expected them to go down with the teams they were competing with around there. So it really is unbelievable. I mean, as you said, exactly 10 years on from winning the Premier League, literally, like, to be in League One is astonishing. And with the squad they had, it's astonishing. But it's difficult because we also have to look at individual players. So, for example, Abdel Fattah was the second most valuable player in the league at 24 million euros. Now, having a player at 20, he's gone down to 20 million euros. Now, that is an extremely high value for someone in League One. But there is still a market for Fattah. He definitely will move on. He's not going to play in League One next season. And again, it's difficult because Leicester, they're in a weak negotiating position. They've got some serious financial problems at the club. They're going to need to sell and recoup money. So they may be forced to sell a bit lower, but he probably is worth 20 million. I mean, he actually had an okay individual season, very good at times, and scored some spectacular goals, and there is certainly interest in him. The same could be said for 16-year-old talent Jeremy Monga, who's actually been linked with Arsenal over the past few months, and is one of the brightest players of his age group in the country. He went up to 15 million because considering what he's doing at his age, despite Leicester's poor performance, there is just interest in him. But as you said, the majority of the rest of the squad obviously plummeted in value. I mean, I've got the squad list in front of me now. You can just see red arrows going down for all of them. So it was hard to find that balance to be aggressive enough to take into account how poor their season's been and how disappointing the players have been, but also, looking at individual players and the market they still have, because a lot of this squad, you would imagine, will be moved on and won't be in League One with Leicester. And Leicester are still, they will be overwhelming favourites to absolutely smash League One next season. And if they don't come up in automatic promotion places, it would be a bigger shock than them getting relegated, I think.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing, and you're absolutely right. I've got the page open and the biggest market value decreases over the course of the season, and there's 6 Leicester players in the top 25. You mentioned they've obviously got some young players who are sellable assets, but in many ways, those will be the players that the fans want to hold on to. They want to move on. These older guys are all depreciating assets, but that's the difficult part of getting relegated, isn't it? In the sense that you're kind of almost hamstrung or have these kind of older players with bigger contracts kind of tying you down to an extent. I know obviously the modern era players do have kind of clauses where their salaries do decrease when they get relegated, but I guess for Leicester, Ben, the only real hope of them bouncing back is if they can shed as many of these kind of older players who have been seeing their market value drop significantly over the last kind of 2 or 3 years.
Definitely, and they've got serious financial problems at the club, so I think the fans will fully expect the likes of Fatawu and Monga to move on. They have still got some other younger talents like Louis Page, a 17-year-old. He's currently got a 4 million market value. That's the sort of player that I think they'd want to keep and build around. But you're definitely also right in saying it's those older heads that the fans will be really frustrated at. I mean, in the game when they essentially got relegated at Portsmouth, Harry Winks having a go at the fans, getting onto the bus. Like, it's players like that have seriously let the club down this season. There's been ill discipline, there's been a lack of fight. And yeah, I mean, considering where they were 10 years ago, it's a sad state of affairs. But yeah, I think I would imagine they'll try and build around some of the young players they can keep. But I think they'll be realistic enough to know that Fatawu and Monga will have to be sold and moved on this summer, most likely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ben, I usually say at the end of these segments, we'll speak to you soon, but actually we'll speak to you very soon because later in the podcast we have you back on to discuss the Premier League market value updates. But that's fantastic. I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens to Hackney and some other players in that squad, obviously, and then it'd be really interesting to see how Leicester City do in League One next season. But for now, let's leave England, let's head to the Netherlands and speak to Kevin Lux, who is one of our data scouts in the league, to discuss all things to do with the Eredivisie 8 market value update. And we are now in the Netherlands, where we are discussing all things Eredivisie. The Dutch top flight also had a huge market value update in recent days. Joining me, first time on the show, is Kevin Lux from our Dutch team. Kevin, it's great to have you on the show. Debut on the Market Values podcast. I hope you're well. And I'll just kick things off by asking you, how has the season gone in the Eredivisie? For people who maybe haven't been keeping up with Dutch football, they may have heard about Ajax kind of falling apart. How would you sum up this season and how it's gone for Dutch football?
Well, it was a terrible season for Dutch football. Performance-wise, it was a very, very low season. All the main teams, they didn't perform up to their standards. PSV, landslide champion, the earliest champion in Dutch history. So that says a lot about how Ajax, Feyenoord, AZ have performed over the year. It was not great football to look at. Teams, they had their bad stretches, never really got into the season, and well, that's especially was noticeable during European matches, where all the Dutch teams they underperformed, and they lost a lot of points in the UEFA ranking. So in about 2 years, we lost our second Champions League spot. So it has been a terrible season in the Netherlands.
Yeah, and I'm also sorry to say that Arne Slot hasn't really helped with the reputation of Dutch football in the UK, but that's a story for a different day, I think. As I said, we had the market value update in the Eredivisie. A huge number of players saw big market values go up and down. And you touched on it there with Ajax and how terrible their season has been. 3 different head coaches, 6 of the 10 players who've lost the most market value this season were Ajax players. So it's definitely a season to forget. But Kevin, I want to maybe focus on one shining light, one ray of hope for Ajax, and that is Mika Godts, the winger, who saw his market value increase from 10 million euros to 35 million euros. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he's had the biggest market value increase of all Eredivisie players this season. And he's beginning to pick up a lot of attention outside of the Netherlands. Can I just start by asking you, how good has he been this season for Ajax, and how good of a player is he?
Well, he has been outstanding for Ajax. As you said, he's been one of the few bright spots. Scored a lot of goals, gave a lot of assists. So he was performing well in the Dutch league. European matches, his numbers aren't that good. So that is, he has made next steps in his development, but there is a lot of room for growth still. If he can show that he can take Ajax, in European matches, if he can help them there, then he's ready for the next step. Then definitely. But for him, this season was outstanding.
Yeah, interestingly enough, when you go onto his rumour page on Transfermarkt, there are almost a dozen clubs that have been heavily linked with a move for him. One of the most recent ones was Barcelona, who just signed Anthony Gordon, so maybe we can discount their interest in him, but maybe not. Crazier things have happened. But aside from Barcelona, we have Newcastle, we have Leipzig, we have Liverpool, we have FC Bayern. Obviously, Ajax are known for a club that develop players and then tend to sell them. Do you think they could sell him this summer? And do you think they would get a big fee for him if he was to go to a Liverpool, a Bayern, or a Newcastle?
Well, I think they have to sell him this season because he's actually the only player that actually performed well. There are some youth players that are actually come up through the ranks, but they're not quite there yet. So they still have a lot of development to do. But for Godts, it seems like he's the only Ajax player that can actually bring in some money. And because Ajax is in need of money to rebuild the side, he's actually the only player that can actually help them rebuild. So I think there's a very, very big chance that he is switching clubs this summer.
Yeah, that's interesting. So sold out of necessity rather than perhaps if he's ready to move. I mean, that was my next question. Do you think he's ready to play for a Premier League team or a top Bundesliga side perhaps, or even the likes of Barcelona? You mentioned there that maybe his performances could have been better in Europe. Is that you suggesting that he still has a lot of room to grow perhaps?
I think so. Yeah, he's he definitely has the talent. He has the capacities. He's a great player. He has a bright future ahead of him. But with a lot of young players from the Eredivisie, if they move too soon to a Premier League club or a Bundesliga club and they perform badly for about 2-3 matches, it's very hard to say how that impacts their career in the long term. So for a lot of young players, it's better to stay in the Netherlands for 2-3 years, to perform well, be the best in the league for 2-3 years, and then make the step to the Premier League because it's a big difference in quality. But he has the talent to make it work. So if he performs well in his first matches and he gains some momentum, then it can all work out. But since he hasn't performed exceptionally well in European matches, for his development, I think it would be best to stay in the Eredivisie for one more year. But I doubt that is how it's going to end up because Ajax really, really need the money.
Yeah, I guess my final question on that would then be, if you're thinking of the players' own well-being or the players' own development, and you're saying, okay, Ajax are definitely going to sell him no matter what this summer, do you think it'd be better for him to go to, a so-called smaller club, like, a mid-table team in the Premier League, like a Brighton or a Brentford, or maybe like a Leipzig perhaps in Bundesliga, so he still has the space and time to develop rather than, I guess I'm just thinking for people who are watching this, who are fans of Liverpool or Bayern or Barcelona, should we be saying this guy's not quite ready for that level? Maybe he has to play for another club before he can ready to perform for a Bayern or a Liverpool in the years to come.
I think that is the best option for him. Yeah, if he goes to a Brighton or a Leipzig, a team that actually gives young players a chance, I think that will be best for him. Yeah, so Brighton and Leipzig, those are the two clubs that I had in mind that would probably be ideal for him. Maybe Newcastle as well. But I think the step to Barcelona, Bayern München, Liverpool, I think it's one step too far right now.
Yeah, well, it'll be very, very interesting to see where he does end up this summer. And if, as you said, if Ajax do intend to sell him. And as you have said throughout this segment, we should remember the pronunciation, because I know for a fact here in the UK we'll mispronounce it. So just one more time, Kevin, how should we be pronouncing his name?
Mika Godts.
Godts, exactly. Okay, one player whose name I definitely know how to pronounce is Troy Parrott, because of course he comes from the UK. We wanted to touch on him because he saw his market value increase in this market value update in Eredivisie. His market value increased by €3 million to €25 million. He's had a really, really interesting career, Kevin, because he obviously left British football and in a sense he's kind of rebuilt his career in the Netherlands. He's now played for AZ Alkmaar and he's had an incredible season, 31 goals and 12 assists in all competitions for AZ. How impressed have you been with him this season?
He has been outstanding ever since he moved to AZ, or ever since he has played in the Netherlands. He has scored regularly. He made his goals. He performed well for his team, for AZ also in European matches. So he has been outstanding for them this past two seasons.
Yeah, I was just checking there that when he moved to Excelsior Rotterdam, his market value was just €4 million. Since then, only 5 Eredivisie players have gained more market value than Parrott, which goes to show, I think, that in many ways he's one of the most improved players in Dutch football in that period of time. Why do you think he's taken so well to the Eredivisie? Do you think it's just his style of football? Do you think it's a physicality or a style of football that suits him best?
Well, I think it suits him, but also the Eredivisie is a very it's an ideal league for strikers to score goals. So we've seen it in the past with Graziano Pelle, with all of these players that had a hard time scoring elsewhere. Then they moved to the Netherlands and they started scoring goals. And then they could make a very, very nice transfer to a big league. I don't know about his history very much. If Parrott scored a lot of goals in his past before he moved to the Netherlands, but it wasn't a wrong choice for him to come here to make a name as a goal scorer in European football.
Yeah, absolutely. And those goals have, of course, attracted a lot of attention. He's been linked with a lot of moves back to the Premier League. I think Fulham were the most recent club, but also Wolfsburg, which presumably was before they got relegated, so maybe we can discount that. But also Betis, who are now in European football next season, and Borussia Dortmund, interesting enough, which would be quite the story if this young Irish player obviously goes from, dropping out of English football to maybe one day playing for Borussia Dortmund. From a AZ point of view, do you think they'd look to keep him this summer, or as you touched on with Ajax, do you think they maybe feel a pressure to maybe sell him if they can get a transfer fee similar to his market value, which is now €25 million?
I think they are trying to sell him. If they don't have to, they won't. But they have a young talent, Max Meerdink, right behind him in the order. So if Parrott leaves, they have a very good option to replace him already within the team. So that makes the incentive a little bit better to sell him this season and get a lot of euros for him. So I think there's a very good chance that he's leaving as well.
Yeah, and just final question. The club's record transfer sales will, of course, Renders to AC Milan for €24.8 million, which was in 2024. Do you think Parrott could break that transfer record for AZ Alkmaar?
Definitely, yeah. If the right club comes and they want to pay the 25 million for him, I think that's what he's worth in today's football, even for a player from the Eredivisie. AZ a little bit of a smaller club than Ajax, PSV, and Feyenoord, obviously, but they have been a club that has been developing players over the years. and they're getting more and more money for it. So I think there's a very good chance that Parrott will break the transfer record this season.
Very, very interesting. Okay, well, Kevin, we do have to let you go now, but thank you so much for all that info on the Eredivisie. And even though we spoke about two players who could leave the league this summer, I'm sure we'll have you back on the show because, as is always the case with football in the Netherlands, there's always new young players coming through and raising lots of interest and headlines. So thanks for coming on the show, Kevin, and we'll hopefully have you back on soon.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And to round up today's show, we are back with Ben, and this is the top billion. This is what you're all here to listen to, unless, of course, you are a massive Eredivisie or Middlesbrough fan. But we're here, of course, to talk about the Premier League market value update. 524 players got their market value changed. Ben, I think you spent the last 3 weeks going to sleep every night with market value figures floating around behind your eyelids. It's been what you've been working on. You have a humongous spreadsheet that we've all kind of helped and contributed with. We've had dozens, if not hundreds, of contributions from users in the market value forums where they've obviously posted their fact. I know for a fact it's not, that's thousands of votes across the Premier League. And here we are now with the Premier League market value update. I say we just get straight into it. There's some big talking points we want to break down. I think probably the one I want to start with is, of course, Saliba becoming the joint all-time most valuable central defender. Obviously in the league, he joins Van Dijk in reaching the €100 million mark. Van Dijk obviously did it in 2019, which means they obviously overtake Kubasi, who was at €80 million at Barcelona last year, Guardiola, who hit €80 million in 2023, and Varane, who hit €80 million, apologies, for Real Madrid back in 2018 before he obviously moved on to Manchester United. So, we're only talking about a difference of €20 million here, Ben, but it is significant. We're basically saying here Saliba alongside Van Dijk has proved to be one of the most impressive central defenders in the modern era of European football.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, because of inflation and the values and stuff, you would have had the likes of Rio Ferdinand, John Terry in 2004-05 getting to these levels. But I think it's quite fair and quite worthy that Van Dijk and Saliba of this modern era are the two centre-backs to get to 100 million, because there was that period where Van Dijk came in, he won the Champions League and the Premier League for Liverpool. He was the centre-back that everyone in the world wanted in their team. People called him a cheat code. You could leave him one-on-one all the time, and he hit those levels. And I think Saliba's now taken that mantle as well. When we consider that he's still only 25 years of age, I think he's at least worth 20 million more than any other centre-back in the world right now. I think he's proven that. Arsenal have just won the Premier League, very unluckily missed out on penalties in the Champions League, but the bedrock of that team was the defence. And whilst Gabriel got a lot of the headlines because, he's great from corners going forward, he's chucking himself in front of the ball constantly, Saliba's that quiet, composed antidote next to him, and he just goes about his work so smoothly, and he's had another fantastic season. I don't believe there's a club in world football who wouldn't take William Saliba as one of their two centre-backs. So quite rightly, he moves to that the 100 million market value. I can't see Arsenal letting him go for any less than that. I think it may even take more. I don't think he's really for sale at the moment. He signed that new contract last summer to go to till 2030 with the club. But yeah, I think it's quite right that Saliba is the most valuable centre-back in the world, and he takes that mantle from Van Dijk. They're quite similar profiles as well in terms of that more calm. They don't often have to go to ground or anything like that because they do the work in their head before that. But yeah, he's that profile that is so hard to find, and prime age, I think it's quite right that he hits that 100 million milestone.
Yeah, and interesting enough, as you said, he's only 25. In terms of his actual achievements in his career, he's still very much at the start of it. I mean, obviously that Premier League is so significant to Arsenal, but it is just one league title. He could potentially go on and win a World Cup this summer. He could go on and win the Champions League with Arsenal in the years to come. So there's a possibility that he could surpass Van Dijk as the most viable centre-back of all time.
Yeah, I think definitely as well, as we say as well, when we consider the inflation and the market we're getting to. The current record for a centre-back was Joshko Gvardiol at the start of the 23-24 season. That was €90 million. I think there's no doubt that now, 2 years on, Saliba would go for more than that. So if he does move on in a year's time to Real Madrid or something like that, I would imagine it would be a world record fee for a centre-back.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone ever would want to pay that sort of money, or if Arsenal would ever want to accept it, let's move it around the other way. I can't see Arsenal accepting any kind of money for Saliba. I was going to ask you about two Bournemouth guys, Ben. Iraola, of course, is the former Bournemouth head coach, and I guess he's still under contract until July 1st, technically. He has built something really great on the South Coast there. And Groupie and Ryan are two players that really stood out. Groupie, centre forward, he has all the tools, I think, that makes him a target for the elite clubs in the Premier League and the elite clubs on the continent. It'd be very hard for Bournemouth, I think, to hang on to him. And then Ryan is also in the top 10 among market value winners. Talk us through maybe first Groupie. I mean, he's the one where I think we're going to hear a lot about once the transfer window really opens up.
Yeah, he's already one of the names that's getting touted out a lot. And just firstly, a mention to Bournemouth recruitment team, because it's absolutely incredible what they're doing. I mean, if you think of the players they lost last summer in Zabani, Kirkes, Hoisin, they then lose Semenyo, their best attacking player in January, to still go on and achieve what they have done and have those replacements ready made is fantastic. And Junior Krupi is the next one on that conveyor belt. We've seen this season, it's so hard to adapt to the Premier League for some players. We've seen the likes of Florian Wirtz, big money signings coming in and struggling to adapt. Junior Krupi has taken to it like a duck to water. He scored 13 goals as a teenager in his first season in the Premier League. That's not normal to be doing that. He is now up to 70 million euros, so a 30 million increase. He was the biggest winner from the entire update, and it makes him the 5th most valuable teenager in world football now. It's only the likes of Yamal and Esteval that are ahead of him. So I think that tells you a lot about where he is right now. There's plenty of interest this summer. I know Bournemouth would like to hold on to him for one more season, and now they've got Europa League football. They could potentially sell that to him, say one more season with us, develop, and then we'll give you a big money move. And who knows, his market value may even be higher by then. But there's certainly going to be big clubs that are trying to get in early doors and get in this summer. Arsenal, Manchester City and PSG have all been linked. I think he has ability that not many have. His ball striking ability from the edge of the box is unbelievable. He needs no backlift and he will just find that top corner. I mean, he won Arsenal the league with that goal against Manchester City. So he's already very popular in North London. But yeah, he's been fantastic. And another one is Ryan. So he comes in January, again, quite a low fee, really. He was a player that was talked about very highly by our colleagues in Brazil. I remember having a conversation with our colleague, Thiago Rebelo, and he said he's maybe not the most technically amazing like the likes of Esteval or Neymar of yesteryear, but his physical attributes are incredible. And when he said that, I thought, Premier League maybe is a good place for him then. And we've seen that over the past 6 months. Scored one goal where he basically runs from his own half. He's been a nightmare for defenders. He's one that I imagine will certainly stay another season, having only signed in January, but definitely another one that top clubs will be keeping tabs on this summer.
Yeah, I mean, in our rumor mill, Ryan is already linked to Liverpool, Man United, PSG, and Real Madrid.
Exactly.
So, I mean, he's definitely been a ton of fun to watch, and I'm curious to see how Bournemouth are going to try to hang on to all the talent. I mean, not shocked that Liverpool is on that list, given where the current manager is headed, right? Or is maybe going to head. I think that the writing is on the wall. So maybe Raola is going to take some of his buddies along with him to Liverpool, but we'll wait and see.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting one. I'm not sure what they'd fit in, but you never know with Liverpool, I suppose, these days. A player who's flown under the radar there, Ben, and I actually think he's almost flown under the radar from a market value point of view for much of the season, is Ryan Cherki. He's second biggest market value upgrade of this update, €25 million upgrade to €90 million. He's essentially doubled his market value this season. He was €45 million when he left Lyon. Now, I know we have to kind of bake in the fact that there was maybe some question marks over his attitude or his commitment, and maybe some clubs are going back and forth as to whether he was worth taking. In Man City, I don't know if we want to say took a punt on him, but either way, he has kind of come on leaps and bounds. And even though Man City obviously didn't win the league, he's alongside maybe O'Reilly and to a lesser extent Kusanov has kind of proven to be the new kind of poster boy of that Man City team, hasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Cherki, he's a name now that we've known about for so long. Ryan Cherki, when he first came through and broke onto the scene, he was 16 years of age at Lyon. We were all hearing about this exciting talent. And then it looked like it was going to be one of those that just fizzles out potentially. And that was a lot of question marks to do with the attitude. And yeah, whether that's he's going to be able to fulfill that potential he had at a young age. And then last season, he really started to show it again. He started to come into the France team, and his ability and technical ability is pretty much unmatched in world football in his position at the moment. So then he comes to Manchester City. I remember when he signed, I thought this is just such an un-Pep Guardiola signing. And I already sort of thought then, are they preparing for Guardiola leaving? Because it's not the sort of player that Pep wants. He doesn't usually like that sort of maverick in there. He wants players that are going to work hard for the team, that were going to listen to everything he says, that are going to stay in their position. And really, Cherki couldn't be further from that. He took a little bit of time to adapt at the start. You know, there's a lot of competition for places. He had a couple of injuries as well, but he was still showing signs that he had the talent. And then the way he ended the season, the last half, he was just fantastic. And he's one of those players in a world now where everything is so rigid, so tactical. To have a player like that who can just unlock that defence and do something special in a moment is priceless to teams. And he's done it in the biggest games. Man of the match in the League Cup final, which they won against Arsenal. Man of the match in the 2-1 win against Arsenal, which people thought may lead to Man City winning the league. Scored a fantastic goal in that game. And a huge talent. And I expect him to also play a big part for France this summer. And don't forget, we have another update after the World Cup. So if he is a superstar for France, could go up even further.
Yeah, I mean, it might seem like an odd question to ask after us just hyping him up and, pouring praise over him. But do you think he maybe almost has something to prove next season, in the sense that there will be a new guy in charge of Man City? As you said, he kind of came in, he was under Pep Guardiola kind of took him under his wing. As you said, he was like the exception to the rule. He was the maverick in that kind of team of, tactical robots. And Pep just kind of found a way to shoehorn him into that team. Maybe, well, undoubtedly to the expense of maybe guys like Phil Foden and maybe other kind of more technically gifted players in that team. But we don't know who's going to be. It's almost certainly, it seems like it's going to be Enzo Maresca who replaces Pep Guardiola. But can you foresee a situation where someone like Maresca comes in and says, well, actually, I prefer to play Foden outright, or Cherki, I'd rather play out left because it fits my system, or I actually prefer to play wing backs, so I don't want to play wingers, so I'm going to have to accommodate you elsewhere. Do you think almost to an extent, yeah, he's obviously done really, really well this season in his debut season at Man City, but he almost has to prove himself again under the next head coach next year?
Yeah, I think all players are going to have that when a new manager comes in, right? But I still think they'll try and find a way, particularly since De Bruyne has left. He seems to have filled that creative void. And with Haaland up front, I think Cherki's the kind of man you want behind him. I mean, it was strange. I got the impression with Guardiola, it was like when you have kids football and the manager's son, who can basically get away with whatever he wants. I remember him doing keepy-ups in the League Cup final at Wembley against Arsenal and seeing Guardiola's face, but he's sort of rolling his eyes, like laughing about it. However, if that was somebody else, I feel like they're instantly subs. But he's sort of got away with it. But yeah, I think Cherki's too good to stay out of the team too long. I mean, you never know. He is a maverick. He's, quite a fiery character. He could fall out with Maresca. Maresca's fallen out with players before. But I think they'll certainly do their best to try and find a way to get him in the team, because he's just simply too good to not be in there.
Yeah, I mean, Cherki is a positive story, right? There's been a few drops too. Saka, Palmer, Wirtz, all dropping by 10 million euros. In Saka's case, to 110 million euros, and Wirtz and Palmer to 100 million euros each. Some of that is performance-based, but I also understand we've done this across other leagues too, that we kind of reshuffled a little bit these attacking players that all fall into the same kind of category in the 100 million euro plus range, right? So some of it is also because of how we view the market a little bit. But yeah, I mean, maybe let's start with Saka, his 10 million euro drop. Again, another final that he didn't win, right? 2 Euro finals as well that he was in the headlines for all the wrong reasons, in my opinion. But talk us through him maybe first before we start with the other ones.
Yeah, and I think Cherki was the exception to the rule, but I think a lot of the attacking stars are maybe it's quite symbolic that they're paying the price for the league and what we've seen going on in the Premier League this season. I think the standard is really high at the moment, which is causing clubs to just drive towards marginal gains. We've seen set pieces setting up really tightly defensively, and I think a lot of attacking players have paid the price for this, because it's so hard to break teams down. They're getting less space. Teams are more worried about, marginal gains, set pieces and stuff like that. And Saka, again, was one to suffer. His numbers aren't atrocious this season, 11 goals and 9 assists in 49 games, but they're not outstanding and not worthy. If you're in that top echelon worth 120 million plus, you're going to pay the price for that. there was considerations to go down even further than we did to 110 million. But if you look at team performance, and he was decent towards the end of the season, he probably is Arsenal's biggest threat going forward again. And I think he has, again, paid the price a little bit for Arsenal's style of football because they don't have the talent on the other side of their attack. So they've had to play in a certain way, especially against the likes of PSG, who can just blow you away if you go toe-to-toe with them. But we felt he does need to come down. I mean, he did get to 150 million when he was amazing and Arsenal were playing more free-flowing football going forward. But he has paid the price for that. And since that hamstring injury that he suffered in January of last year, he seems to have lost that slight yard of pace. When Saka used to get the ball on the wing, every time you would feel he's going to go one way or the other and get past the defender. Now there's a little bit more doubt about that. His finishing has also dropped. So he had to pay the price for that. However, again, we'll see what happens this summer at the World Cup. Expected to start for England. If he has an amazing World Cup, there's no reason that could go back up again. If it goes the other way, there's no reason it could maybe even go down.
Yeah, and I guess with Cole Palmer, it's like he doesn't have that opportunity at the World Cup.
Exactly.
And he drops in market value. Maybe the most surprise omission of any players at the World Cup.
Yeah, I think potentially definitely up. I think when you look at the amount of talent England do have in that position and Palmer's season in isolation, then perhaps it's not a shock. But I think when you consider his name and what we've seen him do in the previous 2 seasons, I mean, at the end of that season when he was smashing it, you would not have believed that Cole Palmer wouldn't be in the World Cup squad for England in 2026. But he has had a really poor season. I think, again, he suffered from such an unsettled team at Chelsea, particularly since Maresca went. There's so many egos in that dressing room. I don't think that's helped him. But yeah, his numbers are poor. 11 goals, 3 assists. A lot of those goals were also penalties. But yeah, missing out again. With these players, Saka and Palmer, I think there's an expectation they could just click back into gear and they smash it again. So that's why we haven't gone too low with it, because their profiles are still highly rated. But performance-based, they had to go down.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably also true for the next player on the list. It's Florian Wirtz, right? It's so interesting when I watch him, when I see him play for Liverpool and then I see him play for the German national team. It's like 2 different guys. Which is like kind of fits into the narrative that you just laid out there, that it's there. It just hasn't clicked for his club team. And of course, I think there were promises made to him when he arrived by the manager who is now outgoing, that really didn't quite materialize. But I mean, it's also really fair to say that the season in the Premier League was very poor.
Absolutely, yeah. And I didn't watch him as much as you before he came to Liverpool, but in the glimpse I did see him, he seemed to have an aura on the pitch and a confidence. Every time he got the ball, something was going to happen. And this season, I've just seen that slowly knocked out of him. Like, even towards the start of the season, his numbers were poor, but there was still those little signs of spark. But the more it's gone on and the more big games where he hasn't stood up, I think you've just seen that confidence drop and drop and drop. I think we still know he's such a talented player. That's why he's still 100 million market value. It's such a high market value anyway, because next season, there's no reason to think he's had a season now. He's dealt with the physicality of the Premier League. He can maybe bulk up a little bit this summer as well, and he can come back and smash it. There'll be a new manager at Liverpool. I'm sure Iraola, who we expect to get the job, will be doing everything to get the best out of Wirtz, because they spent 125 million on him. They need him next season, and particularly with Salah going, maybe that will also help him next season. But again, yeah, it's been a poor season, and he's struggled to adapt.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, it'll be interesting to see what all 3 of those players could do next season, as well as the players that we praised just a moment ago at Bournemouth, at Man City and elsewhere. But if you want to have your say on how these market values have changed across the Premier League, you can, of course, head over to our forums on the website. And as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, you can filter by player, you can filter by club, you can filter by league. You can discuss any single market value you want. You can also vote on what you think those players' market value should go up or down or stay the same. And the next time Ben pulls out a spreadsheet and starts going through those numbers once again. But until then, I think we're probably going to have to wrap things up here. And thank you once again for coming on the show. 2 appearances in 1 episode. I think you've certainly got the record across Transfermarkt in that regard. But yeah, that's all from this week's show. And as always, I want to take a big thank you to everyone who does listen, everyone who likes, all the lovely comments we've been getting on YouTube and Spotify as well. A lot of lovely comments, particularly on YouTube, where people find us from random clips and then end up listening and watching the show. It's really nice that people are enjoying the kind of wide variety of topics that we're trying to cover in Transfermarkt and see the hard work we're doing. So big thank you to everyone who listens. And we'll be back next week.